I'm wondering if the two of you can tell me about how your editor helped you make sense of all the footage. I know you spent like 5 or 6 years with him, and we're very close to the footage and close to him as well. How did your editor really help shape the film?
Yeah, it was really an important process. As you say, we spent a long time filming with Chris, lots of different pieces. We went through a lot of his archives, so there's a lot of raw material there to piece together into a cohesive story. We worked with 2 editors, Michael Ogland and Aaron Wickenden, who were fantastic editors, and it was so useful to have them come in with a little more distance from the material than we had, because we'd been so close to it for so long. So to get their sort of fresh eyes on the project and help us really, you know, figure out what was important to go in there and what wasn't, and help shape that story, they were fantastic, and it was a really important part of the process of making the film.
How much footage did you have of Chris over the years?
I suppose, yeah, it's hard to say in terms of like specific kind of hours and things, but you know, the film took shape over a number of years because Chris's sculptures take a long time to come together. He works on these things for a number of years, and you know, before they sort of come together into a finished piece. So our process was visiting him periodically at his studio, checking in on what he was working on, and trying to, you know, trace the development of different pieces he was working on. So we ended up with a lot of footage with him, shot at his studio. We also filmed installations and openings of various pieces, and then there's a huge amount of archival material as well. He opened up his archives to us, so we went back in that to not only find documentation of his performance works and his earlier works, but we also did a lot of digging outside that to find interviews with Chris from earlier periods in his career to try and really bring those time periods to life. As well as other related material. So, yeah, it's hard to give a specific number, but there's yeah, there was a lot to work with there. So, so again, working with our editors and working together to try and make sense of that and pick what the important parts were was a big process. But yeah, we felt it went really well.
Yeah, that was excellent, by the way, seeing him with Regis Philbin, and yeah, really sort of interesting to see both those worlds contrast, you know. I'm wondering how you viewing Chris and his work has also shaped your work, how you view artists in general, because he was so different for his time. Have you felt more of a freedom in your own work, or you were just so enthralled with Chris that you just sort of, you know, focused on him? But had it changed your view of art in any way, or what you do working with him?
I think getting a first-hand view of his process was very important, and he was very patient. And I think an idea that came out a lot was that sometimes with patience and a process that takes a long time, things can come out of that where you go down a path that's unexpected, you make a discovery that's unexpected, and that happens over the course of years. So I think my takeaway and influence from Chris's work is really just how important the process is, and that patience can really be a virtue in art.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree. I think that was a really interesting thing to learn about. And I guess one other thing that I found quite inspiring about Chris, once we got to know him and dig into his art, was just his commitment to the work. You know, whether it's his early pieces where he was often literally kind of putting his body on the line to explore an idea that was interesting to him, or his later pieces, which, as I said, could take many years and a lot of investment of, you know, both time and money to sort of bring together. Often he started those pieces without a clear idea of exactly where they would finish, or you know, if they would end up in an institution or bought by a collector or something like that. So he really had a lot of dedication to his art, a really clear vision of what it was he wanted to do, which he stuck to. And that was really interesting and inspiring, I think.
I have a quote from Chris, and he says, "I don't have to make an object to have it be art. The performance itself could be art." So since he sort of lived in public, wouldn't you say his whole life was pretty much sort of an act of artistry in some sense?
I think that it's possible to make that argument for the first part of his life, but I think there's a real line for the second part of his life where that's not the case, and he became a very private person, and there was a real separation between his private life and his public life and his life in the art world. And I think Chris really valued that, and I think the work benefited from it as well. I don't think doing the performances he did and having the blur between his private and public life was long-term sustainable for him or anyone.
It was interesting to see him, on his sort of Topanga Canyon property, and how at one point it seemed like he didn't want to leave. I think you alluded to in the film, and that he felt safe there. And I found that fascinating, and that because he was so polarizing to those in the art world. Do you think that was part of why he stayed? He felt more protected there. He could control what happened.
I think it's probably fair to say, or I would think that the way that he did become more private in the second half of his career is probably a reaction to his time doing performances, where, as Rich said, there was this real blurred line between his public life and his private life. But I think that once he moved up to Topanga, he bought some land up there in the late 70s, early 80s, and over time built up a studio and a home up there. It was just a place where he was really comfortable, and it was kind of his place to experiment with new ideas. He was always really interested in what the next project was. He was focused on what he was doing next, and got so immersed in that and excited by that. So I think it was a place where he just felt really comfortable to experiment with new artworks and to pursue the things that were most interesting to him. It was a very comfortable and creatively, free place for him.
How would you compare Chris's life in the 70s to today's selfie culture, vloggers, where we all essentially in the modern world live in public and desire to do so? How would you, he was kind of doing that all before it became...
Yeah. It's interesting, yeah. I think that elements of what he was doing then are a precursor to what you see now. He did some pieces where he took control of TV, in that he would put his artwork, he'd buy ad space on TV and broadcast his artworks there. You see one right at the start of our film. And that was really exciting to him, the idea that he was sort of pushing his art into a non-art context and reaching a new audience with it. And I suppose in a lot of ways that what he did then was kind of a precursor to what you see in the culture more broadly now.
But he was also criticized for that ad, wasn't he, in some sense?
Yeah, I think that people, to a certain extent, felt slightly, some people felt a little bit sort of attacked by it, that they weren't expecting to see this artwork, and then all of a sudden they're watching TV and this thing pops in their face. But I think he enjoyed that element of it as well, and that reaction to it.